All right, let's jump right into another deep dive. Today we're looking at Chapter 5 of Deep Roots, the one about soil structure and compaction.
Yeah, the one you said you were particularly interested in.
Exactly. Now, Deep Roots, for anyone just joining us, this handbook's all about getting a practical understanding of soil
Really breaking it down, soil health, fertility,
and how it all ties into construction.
which I know is right up your alley.
Absolutely. So our mission today, should we choose to accept it,
I think we should.
is to understand exactly how this whole soil compaction thing works.
Right, like how does it even happen?
What does it do, really?
Yeah.
And most importantly, how do we deal with it?
Especially, thinking about construction projects and all that.
Exactly. So picture this, okay? You've got this beautiful, healthy soil,
Like in a perfect world.
full of air pockets, roots just cruising through it, easy peasy, right?
Like a little highway for the roots.
Now, slam, compaction hits.
Oh, no.
It's dense, airless, water's like, nope, not going in there.
And that's where the problems start.
Big time. It's like trying to walk on that super packed down sand at the beach.
After a busy day, everyone's been walking all over it.
Ugh, it's the worst.
Yeah.
So why is this such a big deal for soil, scientifically speaking?
Well, Deep Roots gets into it. Compaction basically reduces the soil porosity.
Porosity.
Yeah, think of it as all the little spaces between soil particles.
Okay, got it.
And when those spaces shrink, water can't get in.
Makes sense.
Roots struggle to grow.
So no more root highway.
Exactly. And even those little microorganisms that do so much good stuff in the soil, they can't thrive.
It's like everything's suffocating in there.
It really is. And the book goes on, it talks about how compaction increases soil bulk density.
Bulk density.
Basically, how much the soil weighs for a certain volume.
So heavier, denser.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that makes it even tougher for roots to push through.
In less space for everything else.
Air, water, you name it.
So what kind of problems does all this actually cause?
Well, think about it. Less water infiltration, more runoff and erosion. Plants can't grow properly because their roots are stunted, and even nutrient cycling takes a hit because those microorganisms aren't doing their thing.
It's like a chain reaction of bad news.
And the handbook uses this great example of a heavily trafficked pasture.
Okay, picturing it.
So you've got all these animals, cows, sheep, whatever,
Just munching away.
but all that walking around compacts the soil.
Makes sense.
Grass struggles to grow, you get bare patches, and then erosion kicks in.
Wow, so even something like overgrazing can lead to these long-term soil problems.
Exactly. And that's why understanding compaction is so crucial, especially when we start thinking about building on that soil.
So it's not just an agricultural issue.
Not at all. It affects the very foundation of what we build.
And that's a perfect lead-in to our next point, because I know you're dying to talk solutions.
I am. Chapter 5 lays out some really interesting ways to tackle compaction, both mechanically and naturally.
I'm all ears. Let's start with the mechanical side of things.
All right, so subsoiling is a big one. Basically, you use a deep ripper to break up those compacted layers below the surface.
Kind of like giving the soil a deep tissue massage.
Exactly. And this is super helpful in agriculture and for prepping construction sites.
But isn't that like tilling? Doesn't tilling mess up the soil structure?
That's a good point. Deep Roots actually talks about that. Tilling can be a bit rough. It disrupts everything, breaks up those soil aggregates.
And those are important, right?
Very. They're like the building blocks of healthy soil structure. So while tilling might loosen things up initially, long term, it can make compaction worse.
Okay, so not ideal. What's the difference with subsoiling then?
Subsoiling is more targeted. It creates channels without totally destroying the soil structure.
It's like carefully loosening up those knots instead of just going in with a hammer.
Exactly. So it's more effective in breaking up deeper compaction without causing as much damage.
Smart. But what about working with nature? Using biological solutions.
Oh, there are some cool ones. Deep Roots talks about cover crops like daikon radish.
Radishes.
Yep. They have these crazy deep roots that can bust through compacted layers.
Like little root warriors.
Exactly. And as they grow, they create channels for air and water to flow.
It's like planting tiny excavators.
Ah, I like that. And over time, they improve soil structure and drainage naturally.
Now that's what I call working smarter, not harder.
Yeah.
Any other natural solutions in the book?
Mulching and composting are big ones, basically adding organic matter to the soil.
So like leaves, grass clippings, that kind of stuff.
Exactly. And as that stuff decomposes, it does wonders for the soil.
Like a buffet for the soil microorganisms.
It improves structure, helps it hold water better, and adds nutrients.
So it's a win-win-win.
It really is. And it's a more gradual approach, but it it has lasting benefits.
That's like giving the soil a nice long spa treatment.
Perfect analogy. And all of this really highlights the importance of treating soil as this living, dynamic system.
Like, it's not just dirt under our feet.
Right. It's about respecting its properties and working with it, not
Yeah.
against it.
And especially when we're building, we need to understand how our actions affect the soil.
Absolutely. And that leads us perfectly to the next part of Chapter 5, where it really digs into the impact of soil compaction on construction.
All right, let's dig in now.
Okay, so you know how we've been talking about compaction and like how it's a bad thing for soil?
Yeah, all the problems it causes.
Well, here's the twist. When it comes to construction, you actually need properly compacted soil.
Wait, really? It's kind of confusing.
It is, right. Like, why would we want compacted soil if it causes all those issues?
That's like we're saying it's both good and bad at the same time.
Exactly. But in construction, it's all about stability. Compacted soil gives you that nice, firm base for foundations.
Makes sense.
So your building doesn't settle unevenly.
Oh, so it's like if you build on loose soil, the house could sink or tilt.
Yeah, exactly. Think about it. Building on solid rock versus like a sand dune.
One's going to hold up a lot better than the other.
Exactly. Chapter 5 even compares it to that.
So how do they actually compact soil for construction?
Yeah.
Is it just driving heavy trucks over it?
Well, that's part of it, but there's more to it than that. They use rollers, those big vibrating plates, and even tampers for smaller areas.
Wow, so it's like a whole science.
It is. And they choose the method depending on the type of soil.
Like clay versus sand, that kind of thing.
Yep. And the size of the project, how much compaction they need?
I'm guessing building a skyscraper needs more compaction than a garden shed.
You got it. Now here's where things get tricky. Remember we talked about expansive soils like clay?
Oh yeah, the ones that shrink and swell depending on the moisture.
That can be a nightmare for foundations if it's not dealt with properly.
I'm imagining cracks in the walls, doors that won't close.
It can get pretty bad. Deep Roots has some crazy pictures of what happens.
Yikes. So what do they do about that?
They use stabilization techniques, like adding lime or cement.
To the soil.
Yep. It helps keep those expansive soils in check so they don't cause so much trouble.
Makes sense. Now, what if you have to build in an area with a high water table, like close to a lake or river?
Oh, that's a whole other challenge. Chapter 5 mentions that.
Because the soil's already saturated.
Exactly. It's like trying to build a sandcastle on a wet beach. It just won't hold its shape.
So how do they even compact the soil if it's soaking wet?
Sometimes they use dewatering systems, basically lowering the water table temporarily.
Like sucking the water out.
Pretty much. So they have a chance to compact the soil properly.
Clever. But I bet even with that, water's still a big concern.
Oh, absolutely. And Deep Roots stresses the importance of waterproofing and drainage.
Like a two-pronged attack.
Exactly. Waterproofing membranes and sealants keep the water from seeping into the foundation.
Like a giant raincoat for the building.
And then drainage systems, like French drains, channel any excess water away.
So it's like a moat around a castle, keeping the water out.
Perfect analogy. So you've got the dewatering to compact, waterproofing to keep it dry, and drainage to handle any extra water.
It's like a whole water management system.
It is. And the foundation design itself needs to be tailored to the soil conditions.
It's like you can't just use the same foundation everywhere.
Nope. For expansive soils, they might go deeper or wider to distribute the load better.
To compensate for that shrinking and swelling.
Exactly.
Go ahead.
It's all about adapting to what nature throws at you.
Like they always say, a house is only as strong as its foundation.
And Deep Roots really drives that point home. They even talk about situations where they have to do soil improvement.
Yeah, soil improvement.
Yeah, like compaction grouting or deep soil mixing, basically strengthening the soil before they even start building.
Wow, so it's not always just digging a hole and pouring concrete.
Not at all. It can get pretty complex depending on the site.
This is making me think differently about foundations. I always just took them for granted.
And what's really cool is that Deep Roots goes beyond traditional concrete foundations.
Really?
It talks about using the soil itself as a building material.
Like building with dirt.
Exactly. Specifically, adobe and rammed earth.
I've heard of those, but they always seem like ancient techniques.
Well, they are old, but the book presents them as viable options for modern construction too.
Huh, that's interesting. I'm curious to hear more about that. Okay, so we've talked a lot about the science behind compaction and how it plays a role in construction. But now, Chapter 5 goes in a different direction, talking about building with earth itself, adobe and rammed earth. Did reading about that spark any new ideas for you?
It really brought home the point that soil isn't just something to build on, it can actually be the building material itself.
Right. It's like taking this age-old knowledge and bringing it into the 21st century.
Exactly. And Deep Roots does a great job of presenting these techniques, adobe and rammed earth, not as something outdated, but as real options for modern buildings.
Yeah, I'm picturing like sleek contemporary houses made with rammed earth walls.
That's the idea. And the book highlights all these benefits, like how sustainable they are.
I mean, the material is literally right there under our feet.
Exactly. Plus, both adobe and rammed earth are fantastic for insulation, keeping buildings cool in summer and warm in winter.
Saves on energy costs too.
Big time. And they're incredibly durable. Didn't the book mention they can last for centuries?
Yeah, something like that. Those ancient adobe structures are still standing today.
They're proof that these materials can really stand the test of time.
It's like we've got this misconception that building with earth is primitive or weak, but Deep Roots totally debunks that.
Absolutely. If you understand the soil and use the right techniques, you can build some incredibly strong structures.
Makes sense. Speaking of soil, the book emphasizes getting your soil tested before you even think about adobe or rammed earth construction. Right?
Oh, absolutely. You can't just grab any old dirt and expect it to turn into a house.
Yeah, I was going to say, there's got to be more to it than that.
There is. Deep Roots talks about how the composition of the soil matters, the ratio of sand, silt, and clay.
So too much clay is bad.
It can cause cracking, yeah. Too much sand and your walls could crumble. It's all about balance.
Like baking a cake, got to have the right proportions.
Exactly. Luckily, the book has some easy tests you can do to figure out if your soil is suitable.
Like what?
There's the squeeze test, where you moisten a handful of soil and see how well it holds its shape.
Oh, that's cool. I like how Deep Roots gives you these practical, hands-on tips.
Me too. It makes it feel less intimidating, like anyone could try this.
All right, so let's say our soil passes the squeeze test with flying colors. Are we ready to start building our dream earth house?
Not quite. There are still a few more steps. The soil needs to be processed, sifted to get rid of any big chunks, mixed with water to get the right consistency.
Okay, so it's not just digging a hole and piling up mud?
Nope. And sometimes they even add stabilizers to the mix.
Like what kind of stabilizers?
For adobe, they often use straw. It helps bind the bricks together and prevent cracking.
Ah, that makes sense.
And for rammed earth, they might use lime or cement, especially in places with lots of rain or earthquakes.
To make it extra strong?
Exactly. We want these structures to last, right?
Absolutely. Now, I remember reading that rammed earth gives you more design freedom compared to adobe, is that right?
That's true. With adobe, you're stuck with the shape of the bricks. But with rammed earth, you can get really creative with the formwork.
Formwork.
The molds that shape the walls, you can make curved walls, arches, all sorts of interesting shapes.
Wow, so it's like sculpting with earth.
Pretty much. And Deep Roots has some amazing photos of modern rammed earth buildings. Really stunning stuff.
I can see why architects would love working with it.
It's like a whole new world of sustainable design possibilities.
It's amazing to think that something as simple as earth can create such beautiful and functional buildings.
And that's what Deep Roots is all about, reminding us of the potential of this often overlooked resource.
It's not just dirt. It's the foundation of so much, literally and figuratively.
Exactly. This deep dive has really opened my eyes to how important soil is and how we need to be more mindful of it.
Couldn't agree more. So to our listeners, we encourage you to take a closer look at the soil around you. Consider the possibilities of building with earth. And remember that even small actions can make a difference for a more sustainable future.
Well said.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Deep Roots. We'll see you next time.